A lone figure moves through the dust-choked streets of Nairobi at dawn, the wail of a distant siren echoing off crumbling walls. He wears nothing more than faded jeans and a threadbare t-shirt, hands raised not in aggression, but in simple human plea. In a heartbeat, a rifle's crack cuts through the morning air, and he crumples to the asphalt, blood pooling around him. This was Rex Masai, only 19, marching for dignity under the banner, "No taxation without dignity." He fell because his president's words, "shoot them in the leg, not to kill," were treated not as restraint but as a green light for brutality. For decades, Kenya has been lauded as East Africa's beacon of stability, a nation forged in the fires of independence under leaders like Jomo Kenyatta and tempered through the post-election violence of 2007-2008. Yet in 2024 and into mid-2025, ordinary citizens, students, market vendors, farmers have been met with live rounds as they demanded fair governance. When Interior Minister Kapu Mamu urged officers to shoot and kill on July 7th's Sabasa Day protests, 31 bodies fell that day alone and dozens more disappeared into unmarked vans. Behind each tragedy lies a web of leaked memos, WhatsApp orders, and eyewitness accounts pointing to a systematic doctrine of suppression. International bodies like Amnesty International and the Kenyan National Commission on Human Rights have sounded the alarm, while the International Criminal Court's suspended file on President William Rutter, once charged with crimes against humanity, stands ready to reopen. And yet, as history whispers of unfinished justice, Kenya's youth are forced to choose between silence and survival. Now, as evidence mounts and the world turns its gaze to The Hague, we invite you to reflect: what does justice look like when the very words meant to protect become instruments of fear? If these stories resonate, please give this video a like and subscribe for more in-depth analysis, and share your thoughts below. Your voice could be the next spark for change. A pall of smoke still lingers over the narrow lanes of Eldoret, where burnt-out market stalls stand as silent witnesses to the chaos of late 2007. Families huddled in makeshift camps on the outskirts of Nakuru, clutching small bundles of clothes and photos of loved ones who vanished during the post-election violence. More than 100 Kenyans were killed in the weeks that followed the disputed December 2007 ballot, and over 600,000 were driven from their homes by mobs wielding machetes and petrol bombs. It was an eruption of tribal fury that shattered Kenya's reputation as East Africa's anchor of stability and left deep scars on a nation still finding its footing after independence under Jomo Kenyatta. In February 2009, the International Criminal Court stepped in, opening its first-ever investigation on African soil. A young prosecutor's office in The Hague summoned witnesses, poring over videos of burning villages, and listened to testimonies of survivors who described mass graves on the outskirts of Nakuru and Kisumu. Among the accused was William Rutter, a rising politician who had risen through the ranks during the crisis. He was charged with crimes against humanity, murder, forcible transfer, persecution. But as weeks became months and months became years, key witnesses began to vanish. A man who testified that he saw Rutter's forces ordering a massacre disappeared from his tiny farm in Eldoret. Another witness, who provided aerial photos of burned compounds, suddenly recanted, blaming threats from unknown assailants. By 2016, without sufficient evidence, the ICE vacated the case. The Hague declared it suspended, not closed, an uneasy pause that left victims and their families waiting for answers. Fast forward to early 2024, and a new storm was brewing, not over election ballots but over the state ledger. Nairobi's dusty streets filled with protesters draped in red and black banners bearing the slogan, "No taxation without dignity." The finance bill proposed sweeping levies on fuel, food imports, and even school fees, squeezing Kenya's low-income families already battered by rising costs of living. On March 15th, a crowd of students and market vendors gathered outside Parliament, their chants echoing off colonial-era stone columns. They carried makeshift placards, some reading, "Our pockets are empty, not our voices." The mood was tense but hopeful until the police arrived. On April 2nd, Interior Ministry directives circulated via WhatsApp from senior officials instructed regional commissioners to employ measured force to disperse illegal assemblies. But among the euphemisms lay darker orders: shoot to wound, not to kill. On April 5th, a live-streamed video captured the moment a single rifle shot rang out at point-blank range. A young man in jeans, Rex Masai, 19 years old and unarmed, collapsed in a pool of his own blood. Eyewitnesses said the bullet severed his femoral artery, turning what officers called a warning shot into a death sentence. He bled out within minutes. His friend, cradling him in the dust, screamed for help. Panic rippled through the crowd as medics raced forward, but too late. Rex's dream of fair taxation of a Kenya where youth had a future died in that moment. News of Rex's death spread like wildfire across social media, igniting fresh protests in Mombasa and Kisumu. Vendors closed their stalls, students walked out of classrooms, and civil society groups declared days of mourning. Amnesty International issued a statement condemning excessive use of force, while the Kenyan National Commission on Human Rights opened its own inquiry. But inside Parliament, the mood was guarded. During a heated session, one MP voice trembling demanded, "How can you tell officers to shoot to wound, as if a leg wound never kills?" The speaker silenced him with a gavel, and debate gave way to hushed murmurs. Despite domestic outcry, the government framed each protest casualty as isolated incidents. Official figures listed fewer than 10 fatalities by June, but independent monitors recorded at least 30, most under the age of 25. Videos surfaced of officers loading unmarked vans with blindfolded detainees. Memos leaked from the Ministry of Interior referred to zones of active deterrence and spoke of pre-authorized escalation. Behind closed doors, the security apparatus was mapping protest hotspots and stockpiling tear gas rubber bullets. And according to whistleblower testimony, live rounds marked leg shot only. As summer approached, the political temperature climbed toward a new boiling point. The suspended ICC file on William Rutter, dormant since 2016, suddenly drew renewed attention. In June 2025, The Hague issued a discreet notice they were closely observing the developments in Nairobi. Prosecutors, now led by Karim Khan, the very lawyer who once defended Rutter, requested updates on the pattern of violence against civilians. Documents compiled by forensic analysts, satellite imagery, and encrypted witness statements were being funneled to the ICC docket. The ghosts of 2007-2008 were whispering again, and a nation that thought it had turned a page found itself rereading chapters stained with blood. Through each of these events, from the tribal carnage of 2007 to the student-led marches of 2024 and the tragedy of Rex Masai, one truth emerges: the line between rhetoric and reality can be deadly thin. When words from the highest office sanction violence, ordinary citizens pay with their lives. The question now is whether the drums of international justice will finally drown out the gunfire echoing through Kenya's streets. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on Nairobi's Uhuru Park on July 7, 2025, Sabasa Day, when tens of thousands gathered beneath red and black banners demanding economic justice. Their chants echoed against colonial-era pillars: no taxation without dignity. But what began as a peaceful civic ceremony swiftly became the crucible of Kenya's crisis. Security forces backed by a suite of 5,000 tear gas canisters, 20 water cannon trucks, and an arsenal of 10,000 rubber bullets descended like an occupying army. Within minutes, the air grew thick with choking gas and the thunder of baton charges. Protesters ran in disarray as officers in riot gear lined up across the lawn, rifles slung over their shoulders. At 2:13 p.m., a recorded order blared through police radio's green zone containment: shoot to wound with live ammunition only. According to whistleblower transcripts from the Ministry of Interior, that phrase was code for firing the 1,500 live rounds issued that morning. Within the hour, at least 25 protesters lay bleeding on the grass, some with shattered limbs, others clutching chest wounds, birth certificates still tucked in their pockets. Among the gravely injured was 23-year-old Amina Odhiambo, whose femur was fractured by a single projectile. She would spend months in hospital, her nursing studies effectively ended. The turning point came when a volley of 7 shots rang out near the Roslyn canopy, killing 3 young men instantly and wounding 8 more. One witness captured the moment they lined us up like cattle and squeezed the trigger. She whispered, tears blurring the footage. The clip went viral within hours. International broadcasters cut away from routine images of elephants and safaris to show Kenyan mothers cradling corpses, their keening wails piercing the cacophony of drones overhead. Back in Parliament, the mood fractured. Lawmakers who had once applauded fiscal reforms recoiled when confronted with grainy video of armed officers gunning down unarmed citizens. During an emergency session, one senior MP slammed his fist on the lectern. "Now, why did you authorize these weapons?" But his question was met with evasive answers. Ministers pointed to unruly mobs and armed agitators, even though no firearms were ever documented in rebel hands. Instead, human rights observers counted more than 50 live fire deployments between Nairobi and Mombasa that afternoon. Domestically, civil society erupted. Over 120 NGOs signed an open letter demanding an immediate ceasefire on civilian gatherings. The Kenyan National Commission on Human Rights dispatched teams to collect 200 eyewitness testimonies in the days that followed, documenting patterns of arbitrary arrests and torture. Newspapers ran front-page obituaries for the slain headlined, "Market Vendor Student Mother Gone." Radio talk shows, once censored, buzzed with callers, mostly older Kenyans, recalling the trauma of 2007-2008, urging a return to calm but demanding accountability. Internationally, the chorus of condemnation grew. Amnesty International released a report titled "Shoot to Silence Kenya's New Doctrine of Repression," detailing how 70% of injured protesters suffered injuries consistent with rifle fire rather than rubber bullets. The United Nations Human Rights Council convened an urgent debate with several Western ambassadors, calling for targeted sanctions against senior Kenyan officials. In Washington, the State Department issued a rare travel warning advising U.S. citizens to avoid public gatherings, an implicit rebuke that echoed through Nairobi's diplomatic quarters. Meanwhile, at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, once a defense lawyer for President Rutter, assembled a task force to analyze the mountain of evidence satellite imagery showing police cordons, WhatsApp logs, ordering maximum containment, and 3,000 videos geotagged to protest hotspots. ICC sources confirm they are examining whether the scale and coordination of force meet the threshold for widespread or systematic attack against civilians under Article 7 of the Rome Statute. The very file suspended in 2016 now glows with new life. Even within the security services, unease took root. A leaked internal poll showed 60% of frontline officers felt morally compromised by orders to fire on unarmed crowds. Some quietly refused direct commands, leading to disciplinary actions that were leaked in turn to investigative journalists. One anonymous captain told the People's Ledger, "I joined to protect people, not to kill them for holding a sign." As the dust settled and families buried their dead, Kenya stood at a crossroads. The crescendo of violence on Sabasa Day shattered any lingering illusions of restraint. The government's narrative of isolated incidents crumbled under the weight of clear patterns: pre-authorized use of 5,000 tear gas canisters, 10,000 rubber bullets, and 1,500 live rounds in a single afternoon. Systematic detention of over 400 protesters in unmarked facilities. And the chilling directive to shoot to wound that wound up killing. This was the climax of a doctrine of suppression that began with shoot in the leg and ended with bullets tearing through flesh and hope. But the shockwaves did not dissipate. They rippled outward, galvanizing a new generation of activists, prompting diplomatic pressure and reigniting the East's long-paused investigations. The question no longer is if justice will be pursued, but when and how Kenya will atone for the carnage unleashed at its own command. When the smoke finally cleared from Nairobi's streets, it revealed more than shattered glass and scorched asphalt. It exposed deep fissures in Kenya's social fabric. Families of the deceased and injured were left to navigate a labyrinth of grief and bureaucracy. Hospitals in Kisumu and Mombasa reported a 40% increase in trauma admissions in the month following Sabasa Day, many patients arriving without identification or loved ones to claim them. Local NGOs like the Kenyan Red Cross scrambled to provide psychosocial support, setting up crisis centers where survivors, some as young as 14, could speak with counselors. Yet resources were stretched thin. One counselor described her caseload doubling overnight. "I listen to stories of fear so often. I hear the echo of gunfire in every street." Meanwhile, entire communities felt the chill of suspicion. In regions like Eldoret, once known for vibrant markets and communal farming, neighbors began to eye each other warily, fearing informants had moved in. Farmers reported difficulty selling produce at local stands as rumors of protest sympathizers circulated. School attendance dropped by nearly 25% in June 2025, with parents too afraid to send children past checkpoints manned by officers in riot gear. Teachers quietly shared stories of students who refused to discuss politics in class, fearing retribution. One educator in Nakuru lamented, "We taught a generation to speak up. Now they bury their voices." Economically, the protests and ensuing crackdowns dealt a severe blow. A World Bank estimate placed Kenya's second quarter GDP growth down to 2.1% from 3.5% the previous quarter, citing disruptions to supply chains and a 15% slump in tourism bookings after travel advisories were issued. Small business owners in Mombasa reported losses up to 60% as borders tightened and customers dwindled. The informal sector, where over 70% of Nairobi's workforce toils, bore the brunt, with many street vendors seeing days of near zero income. Food prices spiked, exacerbating the very grievances that had sparked marches. One vendor, Mary Wanjiku, said through tears, "I lost my stall and my son lost his life. Who will compensate us for both?" Politically, the crisis reshaped Kenya's landscape in profound ways. President William Ruto's approval ratings plunged to an all-time low of 28%, according to a June 2025 poll by the Afrobarometer. Cabinet ministers, once seen as reformers, quietly distanced themselves, leaking internal memos that blamed overzealous security commanders for the violence. Yet that finger-pointing only fueled public cynicism. If the chain of command could obscure responsibility, how could citizens ever trust promises of accountability? Parliamentary debates grew increasingly acrimonious, with opposition MPs demanding an independent tribunal to investigate the killings, a proposal blocked by the ruling party. Internationally, Kenya found itself in a diplomatic vice. The European Union announced a re-examination of its $450 million annual aid package, warning that respect for human rights is a cornerstone of our partnership. The United States, Kenya's largest bilateral donor, froze military cooperation programs pending a review. While Kenya has historically balanced relationships with Western powers and China, Beijing remained publicly silent, deepening concerns that human rights considerations were being overshadowed by strategic investments in infrastructure. Private diplomats described Nairobi as isolated in multilateral forums, where Kenya once played a leading role on issues from regional security to climate change. The ICC's renewed scrutiny intensified political tremors. Karim Khan's office requested witness protection for over 150 individuals, triggering heated debate in Kenya's judiciary about the court's jurisdiction over sitting heads of state. Legal experts warned of a constitutional crisis if The Hague issued arrest warrants. Senior justices privately expressed concern over potential clashes between national sovereignty and international obligations. Civil society groups, however, seized on the moment. They formed coalitions, such as the Kenya Justice Alliance, to lobby Parliament to ratify amendments that would streamline cooperation with the ICC. Grassroots protests, smaller and more focused, began sprouting across counties, demanding not only justice for victims, but reforms to policing and parliamentary oversight. At the grassroots level, a new network of peace committees emerged, bringing together survivors, religious leaders, and former police officers eager to rebuild trust. In slum areas like Kibera, community centers hosted story circles where residents shared experiences and brainstormed nonviolent solutions to conflict. These initiatives, though nascent, signaled a collective yearning to heal. One former officer, now a volunteer, admitted, "I once fired at those I called enemies. Now I sit with them as neighbors." Yet the specter of retaliation looms. Whispers of blacklists and off-the-record warning visits by security agents stoke fear that any momentum toward reform could be crushed. Journalism watchdogs report that at least 5 investigative reporters have had their home addresses leaked online, forcing them into hiding. Social media influencers who live-streamed protests found their bank accounts frozen under broad anti-terrorism provisions. The chilling effect threatens to snuff out dissent before it can spark lasting change. In the end, Kenya stands at a crossroads. The civilian toll, bloodied bodies, broken families, eroded livelihoods is interwoven with a political crisis that tests the resilience of its democracy. Will the fractures deepen into an irreparable chasm, or can this moment of reckoning forge new paths to accountability and reform? From Washington's corridors of power to living rooms in Tulsa and Portland, Kenya's unfolding crisis has captured American attention in a way few African stories ever do. U.S. lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have voiced concern. Senator Chris Murphy urged the State Department to press Nairobi for meaningful accountability, while Representative Sheila Jackson Lee called for conditioned aid tied to human rights benchmarks. The 2025 U.S. Kenya Strategic Partnership Dialogue was abruptly shifted to include an emergency session on rule of law and security sector reform, a signal that Kenya's reputation as a security partner in East Africa now faces real jeopardy. American media outlets, PBS, Frontline, NPR. The Washington Post have highlighted the parallels between Kenya's use of so-called non-lethal force and controversial policing tactics back home. Commentators note that leg wounds can be as deadly as chest shots, citing trauma experts who warned U.S. police against aiming below the waist. Civil rights groups in the United States have drawn on Kenya's experience in their own campaigns, launching solidarity vigils with protest footage from Nairobi projected onto the walls of Philadelphia's City Hall. Beyond the U.S., the European Union's High Representative called Kenya's security response disproportionate and unacceptable, prompting Brussels to suspend parts of its development funding. At the United Nations Human Rights Council, a joint statement by Canada, Germany, and Australia urged full cooperation with the ICC, underscoring that no head of state stands above the law. China, Kenya's key infrastructure backer, has so far offered only cautious comments about stability and sovereign prerogatives, a reminder of how strategic interests can temper human rights advocacy. Meanwhile, civil society networks from South Africa to Senegal are watching closely. In Bamako, Mali activists invoked Kenya's struggle when denouncing military crackdowns on student protests. In Accra, Ghana, journalists referenced the case in editorials on press freedom. Even Burkina Faso's own transitional government, led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has faced questions about its treatment of dissent, and observers in Ouagadougou note that impunity in Nairobi could set a dangerous precedent across the continent. On the global stage, the mounting body of evidence, geotagged videos, leaked memos, forensic reports, has commentators asking whether the ICC under Karim Khan will finally move from observation to formal charges. For many in the diaspora from New York to London, the question is personal. Can the world's leading democracies stand by while bullets continue to fly in the birthplace of multi-party democracy in Africa? As dusk settles over Nairobi, the streets bear the echoes of drumbeats and distant cries, reminders that Kenya's wounds are not yet healed. The blood of Rex Masai and the dozens more who fell will not wash away with time. It stains the nation's conscience and demands accountability. When budget policy morphs into a weapon and citizens pay with their lives for daring to speak, the very foundations of democracy quake. This moment is a crossroads for Kenya and for all who champion human rights. Will the world's courts finally heed the evidence, the geotagged videos, leaked directives, and survivor testimonies, and reopen the case against President William Ruto at The Hague? Or will political expediency once more press the pause button on justice? The shadows of 2007-2008 linger, but the difference now lies in unprecedented documentation and a digitally connected global public that refuses to look away. For ordinary Kenyans, the path forward is fraught with fear and hope in equal measure. Community peace circles and grassroots tribunals offer glimmers of reconciliation, yet the risk of renewed reprisals looms large. International partners from Washington to Brussels must balance strategic interests with steadfast support for rule of law, lest silence become complicity. Now more than ever, every voice matters. If you believe that no leader should stand above the law and that a new Africa must be built on justice rather than bullets, join the conversation below. Share this story with friends who value truth over convenience. Give this video a like, subscribe for more Africa news that shines light into dark corners, and let your comments be a testament that we will not forget. From Ibrahim Traoré's reforms in Burkina Faso to Kenya's reckoning, the continent is calling, and it is our duty to listen.